All right, I'm back. It's another day. Uh, so the glue is dried on this one. Now this one I had pre-prepped, and it even came with this nifty little plexiglass panel in the front. I glued on afterwards the antenna. It actually didn't go to this TV, but I liked it, and I like having a little antenna. I glued the knobs in, and I put these guys back on. I had to keep the structure that holds them in place, otherwise nothing held them together. And there were some fuses inside on this board that I really liked, so I just glued them on the outside. And that frame is complete. Now this one took about half the work out of it. This other one I was working on is a little bit more what you might have to face. I already pre-stripped the TV and glued the knobs in the wood panel there. Now, when you first do one of these up, you have to unscrew the back of the TV, remove all the components. You have to remove the tube. Bear in mind that the front of the TV has glass that's really thick, but it actually tapers to where it hits the electron gun to a paper thin amount. This I would recommend doing outside, but once you get that back off, just kind of knock that little real thin portion near the big massive collection of copper in a coil. Just knock it slightly and let that gas dissipate outside so you don't accidentally do it while you're working on it. And I would recommend throwing that away pretty quickly. Most trash places won't actually take that because it contains poisonous gas unless you break it up. If you break up that glass, as I said, bear in mind that this front piece is really thick glass. It is razor sharp. I recommend wearing some leather gloves when you do that. So you get that portion out, and then it's got a circuit board. It's the other main component. Be careful, as the capacitors could still hold a charge even years after that TV was used, especially if you've just plugged it in and found out that the TV didn't work. One possible thing you could do to try to help that is while the TV's unplugged, try to turn it on a few times. It's a similar process for a computer, trying to dispel that very last of the charge that might be left in the capacitors. That is not a foolproof method. It doesn't always work, and those capacitors could hold enough charge to severely hurt or kill you. So once again, wear your leather gloves. I've yet to ever actually have that be a problem. I've never been shocked by anything, but I'm not going to say it can't happen to you. Just go ahead and get that board out of there. It's usually kind of just sitting on a little tray here, and once you take off that back panel of the TV, it might come with it. Or it might have to be unscrewed from that piece of plastic. Most TVs kind of work out like that, but here's another one that's a little bit different where the board would have been mounted right here. This one had like the large tray piece that you see attached here on the back portion of it. This one had it on the front portion. So when I go to make this one into a frame, I would actually probably trim this up a little bit so it sits flat. Depends on how thick I want this piece to be. A lot of people recycle those circuit boards. There are very specific scrap places that'll take circuit boards and give you a fair price for it. Or you can go to a regular scrapyard and you just kind of have to throw it in their steel pile, which is the cheapest of scrap. That's the responsible way, in my opinion, to get rid of anything metal. There's no reason why we shouldn't recycle metal. It is the most convenient and easiest thing to recycle. But you can just throw it away if you want, and that is your choice. But once you get all the things out, and then there's usually some components here, like here was a speaker, which you'll see right here. And then right here was mounted this piece right here. I think you might have seen me yesterday taking this apart, but that's what actually the knobs and tuners would sit on. But it's really heavy. I'm going to recycle that myself and adds a lot of weight to it. And if you try to hang this on the wall, it'll always hang like this because of that weight. So those are actually pretty easy to glue in. The channel selector knobs, tuners, whichever you want to call it. Now, there were some fancy wheels under here I kind of wish I would have kept, but it wasn't worth the effort of trying to keep an entire component. And then here's the power switch too. So this one's actually pretty simple. It's already relatively thin. I don't really have to trim anything. but I am going to have to put some plexiglass in this. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Give me just a second here to blow my nose. I promise I am not diseased. Those of you that might be viewing this from another part of the world than where I am, I'm in Northeast Ohio, and for the last few weeks, the weather has been yo-yoing between 30 degrees and 60 degrees. So those of us who are affected by that have allergy problems. It's not because of the virus. I assure you, I am monitoring my symptoms during this time. So before we get started on the other one, this is actually the one I was working on. I had pre-painted it. I had done a lot of work on this because I wanted this to be slightly thicker, because not only can it be a frame to hang it on the wall, I can use it to display some of my action figures. You might see from the background, I'm a bit of a toy nerd, but I'm a realist. I open all my toys. I assume that if I'm never going to sell the damn thing, the value of the toy doesn't matter. I might as well enjoy it. And as long as he is responsible with it, so can my son. All right. So what's missing on this guy is some wire across the back to actually hang it on the wall. Now, actually, had this tool staged right. That rarely happens to me. Once again, you should be doing this in a workshop. I live in a tiny, cramped apartment and don't currently have access to my studio, so I'm going to be making a mess all over the floor. If you have a garage or a barn, a basement, wherever that you have a workshop, I strongly recommend doing that there and not in your bedroom of your tiny little apartment. So I'm going to drill a few holes. Oh, actually, I lied to you. I actually had the holes in there already. So I suppose I just really need some wire cutters and some pliers to bend it. Looks like I got both in this one. All right. So I'm in Northeast Ohio. I'm going to put on a radio show known as the Alan Cox Show. I like listening to some of the local flavor comedy shows. They're in the shock jock style. So if that bothers you, feel free to mute it. But if I'm going to be using tools and other things, I'm not going to be talking much. I'll try to turn the volume down on it if I'm going to talk to you. But this is the more instructional version of the how to build a frame from an old TV. As I showed yesterday, this is the photo that I put in my one that I have here. I'm making a few more. I'm going to gift one of these photos, and this was actually printed by the photographer himself, Eli Williams. I'm going to gift one of these to him with this framed in it, and also another one to Aiden Flynn, who actually helped me build this entire assembly. He's a 14-year-old kid, lives in Cleveland with his single mother, and he has been a tremendous help to me. And despite all the things a 14-year-old kid alone a lot at home could get into in the city, especially the poor part of the city, he's doing remarkably well. That, as far as I understand, no drugs, no alcohol, and does well in school. So, it's interesting to have a kid who's got his shit more together than most adults I've met. So there'll be one for Aiden and there'll be one for Eli. And you probably won't see me make all of them. All these TVs vary a little on how much you might want to adjust them. So now I'm going to turn on my radio show. Alan Cox is a Cleveland local. If you don't know where I'm from, I'm near Cleveland. I'm actually in an eastern suburb of Cleveland. So let's turn the radio back up.
Is a rip-off of Gary Glitter? Absolutely. Really? This takes me back to early pyramid days. This is like the only music you could use.
Once again, this is also some upcycled wire. I just found a roll laying around. For like the home crafter, the junk artist like me, it is very common to find piles of people's old hardware just because they don't want to sort it. If you've got the patience to sort out the hardware, you very often don't have to buy your own hardware. All right, this is actually a much heavier gauge than you would really need for this. It's actually more of a baling wire. But better than you need is better than less than you need. You could also use like the plant wire. I had a little roll of it hanging around here not too long ago. There it is. This is actually not plant wire. Well, plant wire and craft wire are the same thing. It's a much thinner gauge. It's usually made of aluminum, so it bends much easier. You can use that too. Depending on how heavy your TV is, you can double it up a little. You could use string if you really wanted to. But I just happen to have this wire laying around. Make it straight, run it across. As to where to put your holes, I usually keep it near-ish the top, but not too near the top, because the wire will always say, where I put these holes might actually be a little too near the top. I don't know if you can see where I point it. It's right near the front of this fuse situation here. Usually about a third of the way down is the best idea. You don't want to put it dead center because it often, especially if you're going to use the top to hold stuff, it very well might tip over. All right, let's cut that. Need to do the other side of the hole. You could also hide it a little better than I did if you want. Having the wire show through on the sides isn't a problem for the way I've designed this. It's got that kind of industrial punk look to it. The junkyard aesthetic, the Analog Kingdom, that little TV throne, has got like a book, little guide that goes to it based off of our Destructicon events, and it very much has the aesthetic of the imaginary universe I invented. I call it corporate satire, junkyard, anarchist, with a dash of Nerf punk. I have a better explanation, but I have it saved as a file. I'm manic if that's not clear. Hence the babbling. It gets even worse around pretty girls. And because of that, my short-term memory is kind of shot. So I write everything down. I'm a little bit of an obsessive data hoarder as opposed to just being a junk object hoarder. Those at Ingenuity can attest to that. My son and his mother can attest to it. All right, wired up. You can see that, the light. You can see I actually even just used an old Priority Mail box, the backing for this guy. Now, the only problem I might have with this guy is this window is tinted. I really struggled on what picture to use because, honestly, this picture would have been shown a lot better if this glass wasn't tinted. And I preferred the bigger printed one that the photographer himself printed. These I had to order copies of elsewhere. But I couldn't think of anything more that should be inside this frame than that. It's a recess a little bit of a ways back, too. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. And I can actually go mount this guy on a wall. This is my dresser. Wire holes without it falling off. All right. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a close-up. I love these telescoping antennas. And one of the reasons I like this is I can actually rotate this 360 degrees, even drop it flat completely, like that. And you can see the insides where I've gutted all the electronics, minus this one I needed to do to keep these little side knobs on there. There's your very thick gauge wire. I used the screws that used to hold on the picture tube. I don't think I articulated that very well when I was telling you about taking the screen out. Picture tube's the same thing. It is full of compressed gas. Once again, reiterating the safety issue there. And I actually used the little mounting brackets. There's little spacers in here to space out where to put the piece of cardboard. There you go. Now, let's get into one that's going to be a little bit more like what you might find, because that was a very unique TV set. Inside, outside, I wiped it down. As a heads up, the inside of these things are always filthy. It's not like people can clean the inside of their TVs. And, you know, I put this TV somewhere between the 70s and 80s. So we're looking at a 20 to 30-year-old television set. Ooh, wait, 80s. So I'm 37. So the TV could be at least 37 years old. So 30 to 40 years. I was off by a decade. Once again, upcycled. Now, this is a bunch of kind of like framing plexiglass. This stuff, plexiglass in general, is actually a little pricey. You could use regular glass, but then you'd have to get it cut, and there's no way to put the holes in it to screw it on. I strongly recommend plexiglass for this. But they got rid of it because it had these little scratches and everything. And for what I'm doing here, a few scratches isn't going to matter that much. What I am looking for is the size to cut this guy. Now, plexiglass is actually a little difficult to cut and drill and do all that sort of stuff. I guess I can have a T-square. All right, I'm going to get myself a marker to mark this out. So basically, I just laid it over where the mounts will be. When you cut plexiglass, it produces heat. Cutting produces heat in general. Plexiglass is plastic. It will melt on you as you go. And if you put too much force on it, especially when you're using something like a jigsaw, it'll just crack and shatter everywhere you go. There's one trick I've learned that'll sometimes help. It usually is pretty effective. But when you're trying to drill a hole in it too, you have this natural tendency to push down on the drill. Try to avoid that as best as you can and turn your drill down to a lower speed. Same situation, especially if you're drilling near a corner, it'll have this habit of just cracking the whole corner off. Same when you're screwing down the screws, it could just crack right through it. So don't use too much force with plexiglass. One thing, if you're using these TV frames, if you're going to use the old mounting brackets, right, that are kind of right here, then this piece of plexiglass is going to be recessed back a bit of a ways. The front of the TV actually curves outward, so it would fit in there and then push its way through that recessed space. So if you're going to do it where you're screwing it back into the holes, you're going to have a gap. I like that because it's more secure. Another option is to actually cut this smaller, especially if you have issues screwing in the corner, and have it sit inside the lip of the recess right there. And then it'll sit with a lot less recess. I'm still making up my mind on which one I'm going to do. Talking about it now, I was going to put it on those screw holes, but I do sort of like the idea of that recess because it means I could possibly get 2 TVs out of this one piece of plexiglass. So, I was looking for a marker. I recommend a cleaner, a non-permanent marker. I may not actually own that. But you can get Sharpie off with, usually with rubbing alcohol.
Weren't allowed to watch the news or anything like that, so there was a couple days where we were told to just stay in the apartment when the Iraq war started. You stuck to that? Like you're banging hookers. Clearly the rules were peeling away for you. Guys, I can't have the news on while there's prostitutes. I was saying like that those were the rules, but I was worried about watching the news. And I started had cable and I never watched Filipino news. You have cable in the Philippines? Oh. Hey, Filipino news. Yeah. So I had to like
I'm tracing out the corners because the corners are kind of rounded. So I'm going to see if I can cut the corners. I'm actually thinking now, I do really like the idea of recessing it. A lot less chances of me cracking this up. It doesn't mean I got to cut the corners off, which could present its own set of issues here too.
Part of our deal. They know that and they accept it. But that's pretty wild. I don't know if that goes for American
All right.
This piece is
square, or at least it should because it's store-bought. It's as manufactured. So I'm going to use a T-square to make myself a nice straight line. If for some reason you can't do that, I just rough drew in where it is in there. You can measure over the same, and then connect the points with a straight edge. All right. So I apologize. The audio is probably terrible with that radio in the background, but it's on commercial, so I'm going to turn it down before they hit me for advertising on YouTube. They'll hit you for songs that are playing around in the background for copyright issues. All right, I've marked it. You know what? I marked it and then realized, gotta kind of mark past your point. I'll explain that in a minute. No, I'm definitely not going to get 2 pieces out of this. So the little trick to cut this without melting it or cracking it is tape. I would recommend the blue painter's tape. You can use regular masking tape if that's all you got. But the blue painter's tape will come off easier. And don't bother cleaning this piece of plexiglass until after you've gotten that. Actually, my tape is way up here. That's a moving dream because I'm in a, as I keep mentioning, tiny little apartment. Hey, being an artist is not a very lucrative career. So, you know, if you want to pay me for doing art, I sure could use more money. Try not to fall on your butt with all the precarious things I left laying around my place. Now I can actually see through the tape. That's good. I'm actually going to put tape on both sides, but let me work on this first. Need another straight edge. I'm going to go get another straight edge. Well, I could use this big one. Don't put things in your mouth during the coronavirus thing. As in, don't do what I just did. I promise you that all this tedious measuring and stuff will pay off. Project is only as good as you plan it to be. Keep wanting to stick things in my mouth. It's an old habit. A bad habit. Before I move on, I'm going to lay it back over where it was and see if that suits how I was going with this plan here. Might actually be a little too, I might leave a little too much on there, but I'm going to go ahead and cut that like it is for now. I'll sand it down a little bit. Here's the good part about this. I have yet to really ever in my life be able to cut a straight line. This doesn't have to be perfectly straight. If you want to be real fancy about it too, you can sand the edges so that they're smooth, because after you cut plexiglass, it is pretty sharp. Not as sharp as cut glass, but still pretty sharp. There's always that say about use gloves when you're handling things that are sharp, but you don't want to use gloves or like floppy sleeves when you're handling tools, because it reduces your ability to grip, and the tool can catch and pull in the glove. You're better just using your straight hands. Let's go ahead and tape off the other side. Also, I'm going to try to remind myself here to drill the holes in the side. Since I'm going to glue this in, we're not going to see this fully finished today. Because that glue, I would recommend giving it overnight to dry. Since I know where my drill is at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oh, I'm missing my safety glasses. My apartment's a little hoardy right now because all the places I would go to distribute all the things I come across. Salvation Army, the various donor places, Ingenuity, to restock their supplies. They're all kind of shut down right now. Knock the flash off the other side. I can eyeball this because it does not have to be perfect. All right, those will be the holes for the wire. I'm just gonna check to see if my shell came back.
All right. Bickerstaff? Gee, Bickerstaff. Tell you what, weirdest story I read locally, or one of the weirdest, by the way.
All right, let's get out the
future of Punch Bowl Social being up in the air. Makes sense. Right? It's a huge building. Everybody's closed. That's a chain, of course. It's very flat. And so all the
short man syndrome. I am all the Irish leprechaun that I'm told I am.
shut down for now.
Especially with my exceptionally Irish name of Ryan Patrick Kinney.
Yeah,
So, let's get the jigsaw, you know, stored very safely, conveniently, right over my head.
Why, are they related?
They're not. I mean,
Is it the same ownership or something?
no, I thought it was strange. The article I was reading is that Punch Bowl their future is uncertain because holes, barrels, we got to work together.
Come on.
We're not the same team here. What's a barrel? It's just a really big bowl.
Crackers, punches.
Yeah, we will.
There's the other thing, too. I would recommend for safety that you clamp this down. I'm not going to do that because I'm not always that safe. Everybody I work with at Ingenuity looks at me with power tools and cringes because they're pretty sure at some point in time I'm going to cut my hand off. I assure you, I think I know what I'm doing. That doesn't really help anyone. Except I put this line on the wrong side. I'm going to go this way. The line's kind of on the wrong side. Well, let's start by cutting this portion then. already cracked. I'm actually missing the plate that's supposed to be there to make this nice and flat. Clamping it probably would help with the fact that it's jumping like that.
Like, we would always go there after church.
Cracker Barrel? I've only gone with my older kids because there's one near where they live. And it's, yeah, it's fine. I mean, I think if you zero in, I think you have to zero in on like.
All right. Not liking how it's doing that. It's really just jumping too much. So I'm going to switch tools here. This is much harder to do. It works better if you've got a metal sleeve. But you can try to cut it with a utility.
Like a family, and I was connecting in our church. So there was a buffet that was never in church with too. That we would go to sometimes. And then there was my grandma like that. She was so loud. We would go to the buffet. And then we would go to Cracker Barrel sometimes, or not.
It is much harder, but it won't crack as much.
So we would make ourselves chips. We would have hot dogs and hamburgers. Yeah, pickle and rice side dishes.
Yeah. I always went to my grandma's after church. And she just cooked dinner when I like my parents now, when I see them, I mean, they started doing that when they go somewhere after church.
Yeah.
She was the worst cook. Oh, really? Wow, it was like, we'd go there and pretend like it was delicious. Yeah. I didn't know any better at the time. I mean, it wasn't good. You just eat a little bit of it just to try to get done with eating to get out of there. Because it was just so bad. Oh, like, it's like she was allergic to salt. I don't know, it was so bad.
They are. It's probably blood pressure issues.
No, but it was, she just.
Another option would probably be use my Dremel. It's I think a
My
better
uncle
tool for
used
this.
to.
The jigsaw just jumps too much for me. I feel like I've had this problem.
We would like make the lemon-based chicken wing sauce from the end. So he would have all five of like us, my cousins and everybody like rolling lemons so that we could juice them to make the sauce for chicken wings. And then we would like to bread chicken and whatnot. Oh my god, it was so good. It was like all good on the grill. And it was unbelievable.
My parents do things now that I wish they had done that I wish they could have done. Yeah. Like when I go home, like, oh, we don't, we're not church going people like that, you know. But for a while, when I would go home and see my family, I'd go to church with them. Yeah, just fun. When I was a kid, we would always go to 9 o'clock mass on Sunday morning. 9 o'clock mass, right? Now my parents are older. When I go see them, I go, sure, you guys up there. They go, no, we go to noon mass now. Like, now you go to noon
You know, the funny part about this is I've done this before. As I mentioned earlier, with the ingenuity people looking at me with fear in their eyes when I pick up a power tool, is I seem very haphazard, and there's an extreme amount of planning and research I put into every project before I do it, just so that I can fly by the seat of my pants. I use a lot of objects that kind of require as-you-go adjustments. There's this level of flash that'll come up because it's plastic, it's melting. Once again, a better ventilated area than a small apartment bedroom. This is melting plastic. By now in my life, I think I've worked in enough factories and melted enough plastic that I may or may not be immune to it, or I'm just used to it and just waiting on the inevitable cancer. Remember how I said I babble? I'm looking at a whole bin of those little wood burners that I used to use to melt and shape action figures for building them. Those I did when I was 19. Well, I started it when I was 19. I'm going to cut this corner. This definitely does not bounce nearly as much. Now, I did get a little crack in this corner now. Now, for the project I'm working, you know, I said there's scratches. This isn't an industrial junkyard apocalypse look, so a little crack is going to be all right. A crack halfway across this where it's not structurally sound, that's a problem. And since I'm gluing this in, the crack in the corner isn't going to matter as much. Whereas if I needed to drill holes in it to mount it with screws, that crack would actually matter more because it would cause a structural problem. Now, cutting through this with the utility knife wasn't going to work. It was taking too long. But there is something to be said that I created a nice little score line for me to follow with the Dremel. One little hazard of this is that it melts the plastic as it goes. Sometimes it fuses back over the hole, but that should crack off pretty easily without damaging the plastic too much. And then you want to clean up the flash, and then it's not a perfectly straight line, but for this project, it doesn't matter. I have a habit of choosing projects where fine details don't matter perfectly. Or, like any artist, you pretend like it was on purpose. Don't just immediately pull the flash up as soon as you're done cutting it. It will still be hot. So get these other two corners off and then see if it fits into the frame. A snug fit is ideal. Having to flex it so much that it bends or goes in, usually not. Too small is actually bad too. Remember, I freehanded these corners, so I'm not all going to look vertical. Let a blade spin down before you set it down.
You know, when they're sending out that relief checks, if you're pregnant, make sure you get $500 for that kid. Because you're like, you'll either get the money or you'll force a Republican to admit that that's not a kid yet.
Right.
All right, let's peel the tape off and get this piece of.
You Satan, you destroyer, you killer, you get out. Well, when did the devil get into this?
It's all the devil.
The devil.
Really? It's always the devil. He's behind
The
it all.
devil created COVID-19.
Taking a mask off.
And he is really not.
This nation, I demand judgment on you. I demand a vaccination to come immediately.
Wait.
Yeah.
He's asking for
Science.
For science to help him out?
No,
Where's
Jesus
your-
is going to send the vaccination through the sky.
I'm not too impressed he asked for a vaccination. It just doesn't seem like the right way.
It's almost like
ask for things.
God using evolution. Oh my God. Guys, we are coming together. I demand a vaccination to come immediately.
I like how he's got a hype man. There's just a dude standing there who looks like he's an accountant. He's just going, yes. Yes.
I call you done. I call you doggone.
I call you doggone.
Doggone.
Doggone coronavirus.
Sounds like Mom. Doggone it.
Dad, blam it.
Damn it.
You come down from your place of authority, destroyer. You come down and you crawl on your belly like God commanded you when he put his foot on earth. You will destroy through COVID-19. No more!
No more. Well, anyway, no more. I like how preachers have to
One that's in
basically
right
do an improv. Okay, we need a plague and a cure. Anybody? Plague and cure? Yeah. Okay.
Plague cure and a book of the Bible.
In a book of the Bible. Okay, so Locust, Leviticus,
You're
and
getting tongue twisty over here.
Yeah.
Easy, buddy.
You know what I've always liked? How they always have like the piano man that could play anything. Like the pastor could be up there pissed the hell off. And this guy's back there.
some of that happens with improv. Yeah. Improv ain't good without a piano.
He's like, give me a little tinkle. Give me an interlude. That's what's selling the back selling. No wonder these guys have shows.
Hello.
What's up, guys? Hi, Satan. I don't know what's going on.
Hey, Satan.
Why did you take over the world?
Why am I getting a raw deal here? I had nothing to do with this. You didn't create the coronavirus?
No.
But that dude said you did.
No, I am responsible for overcooked hamburgers now. You do sound sick, though.
That's actually more troublesome. Oh no. You ever tried cough, Satan?
Do you have a fever?
Everything's dry down here. Maybe you got pneumonia. No, I'm fine. I got pneumonia. COVID 666.
Newspaper actually does really well to clean the glass.
You can get a cold in hell. Yeah, of course. It's not a cold. It's a fever virus. Okay. But I want to be on record. I got nothing to do with this. So when he says, like, he demands you to, like, run on your belly, you're not going to do that, are you? I'm going to do that. Has that ever happened? If I run on my belly? Uh-huh. I don't exercise. I was going to say, you a bitch.
If you can clean it again, you probably still get a few fingerprints on it. It's a lot easier to clean before you put it in there, because you are gluing it in, so it will be permanently placed in there.
It doesn't matter. You treat him with respect.
not only does that this curve in, it actually curves all the way around here. You really can only get glass in the corners because the actual edges of the frame curve up. So it's only going to be glued in on the corners. But what you can do is a little like tester is run some duct tape around the edges here if you want.
Sources tell me that they don't tell anybody this. It's top secret. That started in China.
We knew that.
I knew that very well.
Everybody knew that.
Pretty well now. Yeah. I think everybody knows that. Who are your sources? Where'd you get this? Chinese show.
6000 is the best crap glue out there, man. I'm sure they're going to ruin it like they ruin everything else we love. Like talcum powder, you find out years later that stuff gives you cancer. And by they, I mean the people that make it.
It's 216-986-8903. And you can listen to anywhere on the...
So I got that going in.
It's the Allie Cox Show on 100.7 WMMS. And everywhere you go on our free iHeartRadio app.
Some of the glue is perfect.
As you and our community deal with a new way of life, working from home, social distancing, and the continuing question of when will things get back to normal, we know that one of the things you might be worried about is paying your bills.
I need to pay some bills.
We're here to help, and we'd like to redirect your mind to a state of positivity. Get help paying those bills.
Oh my God, there's nothing doing Jim if it's me.
Can help out while we're bills.
That is amazing. It makes such a difference for my family right now.
We got the 12 chances every day for you to text in and win $1,000.
Oh my goodness, no idea how much it helps in my life right now.
Such a blessing to be in my family.
And if you know that it's a treat my kids for something awesome, it's going to be a better time.
This will really help.
So relieved. You have no idea how stressed out I've been. We hope you and your family stay safe. Keep your phone charged and your radio on for the latest on what's happening.
That's really helpful.
All right. Once again, I'm going to turn off the commercials. Just to help that stay in there. All right. That duct tape looks like hell. So we're going to forego that and hope the glue holds it in there. You know what? Honestly, is when I stick the paper in it. I'll have the picture mounted on some paper and put some cardboard over that to kind of seal all this in. I can actually screw the cardboard in to hold the whole thing kind of mushy together. This looks like hell. Next thing would do to put the wire on, but it would get in the way, I think. You know what? I drilled those holes for that wire on the wrong part. Still, I'll have to redo those. They're on the bottom. Yeah, they sure are. So I'll have to drill them, but I don't want to do it right now because I don't want to get that plastic in the glue. We're going to let that glue itself in there. I'm repeating myself now. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud. Yeah, I think that's where we'll go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. You might see me start up another one just so you get the full picture of putting these together.